Hi, everyone. It's Ann Allard. Welcome to another episode of the Bottom Line Me podcast. Brenda's off today, so joining me is my colleague, Joe Alvis. Joe and I work together on a lot of sales training programs at Agency University, and every so often we come across a really good resource that we can't stop talking about. One of our favorites and a New York Times bestseller is Atomic Habits by James Clear. So today we thought we'd share some things that we've learned from this book. Joe, do you have anything you want to add before we get started?
Like you said, Ann, we, get to collaborate a lot, and, we both love to share when we come across something good that we think is really going to add some value, not only to our lives, our work systems and workflows, but, this is good things are meant to be shared. I'm really excited to talk about this book.
Oh, well, me too. As I say, you and I could probably talk endlessly on this topic, but let's try to focus a little. So
Why not,
I think, one of the things that brought us to this book is that we're both really big on goal setting, and we've often spent a lot of time on how to define a goal, and maybe not enough time focusing on how to actually execute a plan, or as Clear calls it, a system. I love the line in the book, that Clear, the quote from Clear: "We don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems." The book really taught me about the need to focus more on the system than on the goal. How about you?
Well, isn't that so true of most endeavors that we all get into? Is you sign up for a new job, you become, let's say, a salesperson, and your manager, your boss goes, well, your goal is to bring in X amount of revenue. Your goal is to get X amount of market share. But do they tell you how to do that, or do they just give you the goal? And so often when we set goals, not only professionally but for ourselves, we set a goal and we don't put as much emphasis on the system or the habits that we need to develop to get to that goal. And that's where Clear really makes some great points on, especially that quote, right? You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. When things get hard, we go into habit mode. We're human. We want to well, this is what I do. This is what I always do. Well, if what you always do is good and works you towards your goal, then when the pressure's on, that's exactly what you should be doing, right?
Right. Yeah, and I love the title of the book, Atomic Habits, because he talks so much about how it's the small or the tiny changes that, or the 1% improvement that we make daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, is what really brings us to those, incredibly remarkable results.
Oh, absolutely. It's not anything big. He gives so many of good examples. I think the one that caught my eye the most was the airplane taking off from San Francisco. If you move the nose of that plane just a few feet, you'll wind up in DC instead of New York. But when you're in San Francisco, we're talking about, I think it was like 3 or 4 feet, and you're going to wind up 400 miles apart when at the end of your journey. And I think it's a very fitting name. It's the little changes, the 1% improvements every day, every step forward. Yeah, that's that. When you stop and look back, look how far you've come.
Well, and I think it's one that everybody can relate to, because, the goal is to get to the destination. And we don't really even really spend much time thinking about how that pilot is, or what that pilot is actually doing, that he has a system that he's following step by step by step in order to get us to the promised land, so to speak, or wherever it is we want to go.
It was funny. I was on the airplane coming back from our last get together when we were in Tampa. And it hit me, like the real life applications of this. Look at airline attendants, right? Flight attendants. Think how habitual their routine is. We've all been on many flights, and it's always the same routine, right? They You hear the terms, the cross check, the safety check. They walk through and they have all these systematic habits that they do time and time, every time they fly.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you what, I bet when things get a little hairy on that airplane, or, knock on wood, something bad happens, those habits, those systems are going to kick right in. And instead of panicking, they go right to that. They fall to the level of those systems and they get it done. They handle what they need to handle in those moments of stress.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an extreme example, but an example of, I think, what James Clear talks about is if that's your habit, then you just fall to that. You don't deviate from that system.
True. So, well, there were so many great tidbits in this book, but I think at one point he talks about how achieving a goal is only a momentary change. That once I get there, now what do I do? If I don't have a system that I can repeat over and over again, what's next? I mean, what's the result, or what's the gain? So. What do you think about that?
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you come into something, wanting to achieve a goal. You set a goal, you achieve that goal. Okay, now what? You're right. It's like, okay, well, that's done. Now what do I do? Do you let go of the work that you put into achieving that goal? Does that just all of a sudden become obsolete and you let it go? Or has the systems you've built, the habits you've created to achieve that goal, they should stick with you. I think you're right in that. I think you mentioned the funny thing he pointed out that was kind of a light bulb moment for me was, let's use a sporting event. Okay, Super Bowl, football. Both of those teams came in with the goal of winning that game, right? So okay, so does that mean that all the work they put in, the practice they do time and time again, is that for naught? Are they not going to try again? Oh, I didn't hit my goal, I'm not going to try again. Or I did hit my goal, I'm going to do it again next year. I mean, that's the whole thing. Winners and losers both come in with the idea of winning that game.
Yeah.
So then, should that be the end all be all? Or should it be the system, the practices, the habits that are really important? Is what I think James Clear is getting.
I think we both agree on that the big takeaway was that we need to spend less time thinking about the goal and more time thinking and focusing on the system. The goal, as they say, the score takes care of itself. The goal happens when you have a system.
I agree with that. He gives a great example in the book. He talks about the British cycling team.
Oh, right.
Is his big leadoff star. Remember that?
Yes. Yeah.
So here's this poor team. Haven't won a Tour de France or any major Olympic event in like 100 years. This new coach comes in about 15 years ago, and instead of, going, well, we've got to win and motivate, he said, we're gonna change the tiniest little, almost seems insignificant little thing. We're gonna change this piece of equipment on the bike. We're going to change the sleeping habits of the team, which I thought was a really interesting thing. He changed the way they eat, the way they practice, the clothes they wear, all these tiny little 1% changes. And what do you say? Within 4 or 5 years of him coming on board and making these little changes, they placed in the Tour de France. Right. And then the next year, they won it for the first time in 100 years. And for the last, I think like 10 years or so, they've been a top competitor, both in the Olympics and there. And everyone attributes it to, well, it wasn't anything big. It was all these little changes and systems that they added.
Yeah, I know. He talks a lot about how your habits shape your identity. And in that example, the collective habits of the group changed the group's identity. So it can work individually and in a group environment, I guess. Yeah.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit. When we talk about system, right? There's buy-in, there's belief in what you do, why you do it, and when it comes to habits, at least what I got from the book, that's a big part of it is changing your identity when it comes to this, and the way that kind of ties in, positive affirmation and that sort of thing. But it's true, when you want to lose weight, when you want to become, more athletic, well, you got to start. Maybe if it's just 5 minutes on the treadmill, you're doing it. You're still making the effort. You identify as somebody who gets on a treadmill, not just wishing you did.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, I was thinking about it the other, when I was rereading some of it, because I've read the book, I've listened to the book. I enjoy it when he's on a podcast, because it's one of those topics that every time I read, listen, or hear something on this subject, something else happens or something else comes to mind for me. And I was thinking about that in terms of what we work in all the time is working with salespeople, and how do we apply something like that to the role of a salesperson? So, when you and I talk with people about making sales calls or doing what we like to call impact activities,
right.
We want them to focus on that, but we never spend a lot of time talking about the fact that they're a salesperson. So it's interesting that we have to identify. What I learned is I think I had to identify that. Okay, if I want to be a salesperson, what would a salesperson do? And make a sales call. Well, the goal isn't to make a sales call. The goal is to become a salesperson. Each time I make a sales call, now I'm a salesperson. Would you agree? Does that make sense?
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of evidence out there, even beyond what James Clear talks about, that absolutely, if you want to be somebody new, like be a salesperson, you have to walk the walk, so to speak. You have the activities, you have the things you can do. As you said, well, this is what a salesperson does. I'm now doing that.
So I'm a salesperson.
A salesperson. Yeah. I mean, it's not the wishing and hoping. It's the action, and it's a big part of what James Clear talks about. Is you have to just put the first phone call on your record. Okay, I made that call today. I saw that client today. I'm doing it. I'm doing what a salesperson does. Now you can identify as a salesperson. And that's a big part of motivation.
Yeah, I think that, he repeatedly talks about asking, the question of yourself. If I'm a salesperson, what would a salesperson do? And the answer will come. Then you know what to do. A salesperson would do exactly what you just suggested: get on the phone, or get in the car, or knock on a door, or do all those kinds of things that typically fall into the category of being a salesperson. Those are the actions, the things that you have to do in order to be a salesperson. So.
It's funny and let's hang on to that idea really quick. So let's talk about sales. What's a common goal for a salesperson is, okay, let's increase revenue by 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. That's a goal. Well, how do you measure that goal? Well, all right. Is it in the number of, like we call them, impact activities, or is there another way to measure it? Clear, he even touches on that a little bit. He says, well, you have to have something to measure, like a lag measure, right? So I've increased this many orders, I've increased this many transactions every month. Well, I can count that. Well, what leads to those? That's the phone calls. That's the drop-ins. Mm-hmm. That's the connections. Those are like your lead measures that create what you can measure, your lag measure, which gets you to your goal. I mean, even Clear points that out, and that's what I love about this book is he breaks it down so easily, step by step, on what we do to make our goals achievable. And that's by creating these little systems, by making or breaking habits.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. He has what he calls 4 simple steps to build a better habit, or, in the reverse, to break a bad habit. So there's the first one is the cue, if my memory is right. The cue triggers your brain to initiate a behavior. It's kind of about noticing what the reward would be. So I was trying to think of an example. Have you got one right at the top of your head?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of it. What was there was one I was thinking about. For anything, there's the 4 steps. Let's clarify that. So there's the cue. Cue leads to a craving, the wanting to commit the action.
Mm-hmm.
There's the response, which is the habit you've done, and then there's the reward, which whatever that might be for you, performing the habit. I mean, to pin that into all sorts of stuff. Let me think of a good one. What do we have that I think of? You were telling me the other day about a good habit that you had. Do you remember what that was?
Well, I hope I have a lot of good habits, but
fair, very fair.
I know I have a lot of bad ones too, but I'm always working on those. But I think one of my habits is exercising regularly.
Okay.
My habit is that although I don't have specific times of the day that I'm going to exercise, I have kind of a cheat sheet that I use. It's sort of reminiscent of when my kids were small, and I used to put the list on the refrigerator of their chores, and you get a gold star every time you accomplish
the gold
something.
Star board.
It's kind of the same thing, but I just have this simple, what I call it, a momentum builder that I check off every time I do a certain exercise. And, so the cue is, I guess that, I feel like I got to get up and move. The craving for me sometimes is twofold. It's that I want to feel better, but I also really love checking that box off. So I think the craving for me is twofold there, and then obviously.
So what is that? So what's the cue when you want to work out? Like what cues you? What triggers you to want to do that?
For me, it can be a couple of things, and most often it's that I'm starting to feel, it's kind of like that 2:00 drag that you get sometimes when you're sitting in front of a computer every day. I start to feel, like my energy is draining a little bit. So the cue is, my energy level is low. Does that make sense?
That's good. Yeah, okay, so then what? So then that naturally triggers the craving.
The craving is I want to increase my energy level. I want to be productive. I want to accomplish something. Yeah. So
okay, so then naturally the response is what? Get up
and move.
Go do the thing. Get out there and walk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then reward, right? You said a gold star on your momentum tracker, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think,
absolutely.
Clear says that, we chase rewards because they serve more than one purpose too, and particularly one, they satisfy us. And so the satisfaction for me of the reward is that I get to check the little box. He also claims that, we chase the reward because it teaches us something. And for me, what I learn every time I get up and move is that I have more energy, I feel better, and I'm more productive. So there you go.
So your body remembers that. It teaches you.
Yes. Yeah.
It's funny. I want to use that teaching segue. So Clear goes, use the same process to make a habit or to break a bad habit, right? So I like his point about they satisfy us or they teach us something. Because I've learned how to break some bad habits the hard way. Let me share my little story. We had
You don't have any bad habits, do you, Joe?
Oh, no. Well, I've broken some of them, and it helps. As a young salesperson, when smartwatches, everyone's got a smartwatch nowadays. Well, I thought I was so cool when I switched phone companies and they threw one in the package, so I had it. I wore it everywhere. Well, the habit I had formed, the bad habit I had formed, is any time that watch dinged, buzzed, whatever, I'd look at it. So here I am at a client meeting with, a considerably large target for me to try and win over. And I'm sitting in this meeting, and every time my watch buzzed, there's the cue, my watch would buzz, I would get the craving to look at my watch. Of course, naturally, that's what they're built for. Mm-hmm. So my response was I would look at my watch while I'm having this one-on-one meeting with a prospect client. And you know what my reward, quote unquote, what I learned from that? I'll quote the gentleman specifically. Do you have somewhere more important to be right now, young man? You keep looking at your watch. Oh boy. Yeah. What a mistake was I making? But deconstruct it, right? Okay, get rid of the cue. Make the cue invisible. That's what James Clear talks about, right? When you have a habit you want to break,
right?
Get rid of the cue. First and foremost, make the cue invisible, and usually the rest of the bad habit kind of falls to the wayside when you're not triggered to even do it. Right. So, I learned my lesson. I would keep my phone in my pocket and take off the watch when I'm going into these meetings.
Right. It's amazing. Well, he talks so much more about how to create a habit, and as you just said, it's either make it obvious or make it invisible. What were the other things that he recommended? That you make it obvious, you make it attractive.
Oh yeah, cravings, right? Mm-hmm. Like make it attractive. Like, okay, well, like your workout thing. Well, if you have your workout equipment available, it's not hidden in a closet, it's not, it's right there in front of you. Well, it's attractive. Or if you're trying to break it, make it unattractive, right? Like take off the smartwatch, put your phone in your pocket, like hide that thing. Response, make it easy when you want to build a habit, and like you said, it's easy. The equipment's right here. You don't have to go far. You don't have to get in the car. You just hop on your treadmill and go. Mm-hmm. Or make it difficult. Make it hard to achieve. Make it hard to do. Make it, like you don't want to do it.
Right.
And the reward. Make it worthwhile. I mean, your gold star. I mean, nothing like seeing a gold star and feeling good. And if you want to break the habit, make it unsatisfying. And I can tell you I have a few cringeworthy moments in my life, but right at the top of that list is getting that comment from a target prospect about not feeling very respected in a meeting. So that was very unsatisfying.
Well, there you go. So the bottom line here is that we want to make a change, a behavior change. Ask yourself, how do I make it obvious? How do I make it attractive? How can I make this really easy for myself? And how am I sure that it's going to be satisfying? How do I make it satisfying? So, and absolutely, as you said, the opposite, when you're trying to break a bad habit would be to, can you summarize that one for me?
Make it invisible, make it unattractive, make it difficult to do, and make sure that it's unsatisfying if you end up doing it.
Well, that sounds like a bottom line to me, but and that's what, speaking of bottom lines, one of the things I really like about this book is the chapter summaries. At the end of every chapter, he just gives you what I like to call the simple bottom line. It's a really efficient way to go back over some of the material and to revisit something that I really found useful or helpful. So.
I agree. He makes it very easy to utilize what he's teaching.
Exactly. Well, I think we're just about out of time, Joe, but this was really fun, and hopefully we'll have another opportunity to come back and share some more of our big takeaways from Atomic Habits. Till we meet again, I'm Ann Allard. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and at Agency University, we hope you'll continue to learn, grow, and prosper. Thanks.